For years, that underground shelter had protected my family through every serious storm. I never imagined the HOA would decide it was suddenly a problem. The notice claimed my shelter entrance violated the community's exterior structure rules. I had built it years before the HOA even existed. The next morning, Karen showed up personally to explain the decision. She said the shelter had to be sealed until I corrected the violation. Karen brought workers who secured the shelter door with a heavy temporary barrier. She assured me the process would be reversed once the paperwork was approved. I asked Karen what would happen if a tornado warning came through before the issue was resolved. She simply said, "Follow the community emergency plan." That afternoon, the weather changed faster than anyone expected. The sky turned almost black, and the wind began shaking the trees around my house. Then my phone received the first tornado warning. The shelter was still sealed, and the storm was moving directly toward our area. Then the tornado sirens began screaming across the county. At that moment, the shelter Karen had sealed was no longer a paperwork issue. I ran outside and checked the shelter myself. The steel door was secure, but the temporary barrier Karen had ordered installed was still there. Even Karen finally realized how serious the storm had become. But the shelter she had ordered sealed was still sitting between us and the approaching tornado. With the shelter unavailable, I moved everyone into the safest interior part of the house. We grabbed emergency supplies and stayed away from windows. The emergency broadcast warned residents to take shelter immediately. Outside, the wind was becoming louder by the minute. Then Karen called me. Her voice was completely different now. She wasn't giving orders anymore. She was asking what we were going to do. The HOA board had started receiving emergency calls from residents. Suddenly, everyone understood that sealing a storm shelter during severe weather was a much bigger issue than they had anticipated. The storm finally reached us. The entire house shook under powerful wind gusts while rain hammered the roof. Emergency responders arrived in the area to monitor the storm and help residents. Their presence made it clear that this was no ordinary thunderstorm. Then we saw it, a tornado funnel developing beyond the fields. For the first time, I wondered whether our house would actually withstand what was coming. Karen finally admitted that the timing of the shelter closure had been a terrible decision. I told her that emergency safety should never be treated like an HOA paperwork dispute. We stayed together in the safest available part of the house and waited. Nobody cared about HOA rules anymore. Everyone cared about getting through the storm safely. After what felt like hours, the worst finally passed. Our property had damage, but the house and everyone inside were safe. The first thing I checked was the shelter. It had survived the storm perfectly, but nobody had been able to use it. A county safety inspector came out to document the situation. He confirmed that the shelter itself was structurally sound and suitable for emergency use. The HOA board had to review exactly why the shelter had been sealed during severe weather. This time, they listened instead of issuing another notice. I told the board that community rules have a purpose, but emergency safety has to come first. Nobody should ever be prevented from accessing a safe shelter during a tornado warning. After reviewing the situation, the board reversed the shelter sealing decision. They also agreed to create clearer emergency procedures for the entire community. The barrier was finally removed. For the first time since the storm began, the shelter was completely accessible again. The incident became a lesson for the entire neighborhood. Everyone learned that emergency preparedness was more important than winning an argument over paperwork. Karen eventually apologized for how the situation had been handled. It didn't erase what happened, but at least she finally understood why I had fought so hard for that shelter. The community created a new emergency plan that clearly prioritized safe shelter access during severe weather. My shelter was no longer just part of my property. It became a reminder of preparedness. That storm taught me one thing I'll never forget. When danger comes, safety should never become a paperwork battle. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.